As I said, this parable of the shrewd manager is definitely a difficult one to understand and apply to our lives. Parables were light to those who had the ears to hear. They were the good news to those who were willing to hear it. When I looked at this reading the first 10 or 15 times, its meaning was hidden from me. In fact, I'm still wondering if I get it. I studied several different theories on this reading and will probably plagiarize all of them. I thank them for helping me out today. Parables are Jesus' way of turning everything upside down. It's just a simple story. Yeah, right. What baffles, bewilders, and befuddles many of us about this is that Jesus commends the bad guy. So let's break this down. In the first 7 verses, we realize that everyone in this parable is relatively corrupted. The owner finds out that the manager has been corrupt in dealings with his accounts, but allows the shrewd manager, shrewd meaning astute or crafty or scheming, so the shrewd manager is allowed to go back to his books and get his affairs in order. If the owner was already told that his manager had wasted his possessions, that he had been a prodigal or squandering manager, why would he allow him to return to the books that he had obviously squandered? The owner could have had someone else go back and get the books in order, but Jesus created this story and this character, and that's what the owner did. So the manager says to himself, "What shall I do?" He needs to figure out what to do so that when he is fired, people will still welcome him into their homes. It's important to know here that Luke often demonstrates how Jesus' ministry and that of his followers is dependent on the hospitality of others. Others' hospitality furthered Jesus' ministry in many ways. Yes, they had lodging and food, but it also allowed Jesus and the disciples to go from place to place and teach the gospel. It allowed them to make friends for themselves in heaven. This manager still needs people to think favorably upon him so that he doesn't have to do physical labor or beg for food and money. He needs to have a future. When he is no longer entrusted to manage this estate, what will become of him? As Jesus tells the story, the manager has an epiphany. He says, "I know what I will do, so that when I lose my job, people will still welcome me into their homes." The manager goes to the debtors with the books and reduces the amounts they owe in the books. Surely this is corrupt. And the debtors eagerly and quickly sit down and change the recorded amounts that they owe, knowing that they have not paid these debts. Finally, the owner commends the manager for being shrewd. Everyone is implicit in this corruption. In reducing the debts of the debtors, they became indebted to him. Again, in reducing the debts of the debtors, they became indebted to him. This connection sets the manager up for a reciprocal connection of friends. It's the old, "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours." The manager literally secures his own future. And so in verse 8, Luke says, "The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings." The owner is not commending him for his incompetence or lying or cheating, but for being shrewd, sharp, cunning. The manager made lemonade out of lemons. He took a difficult situation and acted shrewdly or wisely. It's important to understand the relationships here, the connections. The owner was a very wealthy man, so wealthy that he had someone report to him what the manager was doing with his estate. He was wealthy enough that he had a manager who worked within his estate and dispersed his resources internally, took care of the bills, food for the staff, and he had responsibilities outside of the estate in terms of dealing with other managers of owners. As a result of all of this responsibility, His manager had status in the community. So being fired in this way would have been a disgrace to him and his family. It would have cost him everything. His status in the community, his home, because he would have been living with the owner's estate, or on his estate, and his income. He was irresponsible. He was incompetent, and everybody was going to know it and judge him for it. Jesus essentially tells the disciples that they could learn a thing or two from this guy. That sounds so absurd, doesn't it? Was it opposite day at school? Let's think about the debtors for a moment. How many of us struggle financially at one time or another? How grateful to God would we be if our debt were miraculously reduced with no explanation? A friend often told me how when he and his wife were young and just getting started, they would struggle when they wanted so much to help others in need. But the money just wasn't there. They would pray about it. And even knowing that it could put them in a difficult situation financially, they would give whatever they could, believing that God would provide. Often, shortly thereafter, they would receive an unexpected check in the mail for an amount that covered nearly that exact amount. The bottom line is that God provides us with all that we need. Money isn't an easy thing to talk about. Chris and I, my husband, disagree often about the handling of our funds. Trust me, we do. But in spite of my faith in God, it's always Chris who assures me that God will provide. I'm not saying go run up your credit card bill and expect it to rain money, because it won't. But in the end, God provides us with all that we need with no strings attached. We just need to understand the difference between our needs and our wants, which is a whole other sermon for another day. Jesus understands that this is how the world works. We can use the resources we have to secure the best future for ourselves that we can. This is how the people of this age operate. The manager made the best of his situation. He takes the rich man's wealth and reverses the existing order of things. In Luke, reversals of status are at the heart of what happens when Jesus and the kingdom of God appear. The powerful are brought down and the lowly lifted. The hungry are filled and the rich are sent away empty. The first are last and the last first. Remember, the next parable we'll hear is when Jesus tells about the rich man and Lazarus. People of this world come up with the most innovative, clever ways to make money and to secure their futures and the futures of their families. Whether it's right or wrong, it's what we do. For example, some people search for a new job while still pretending to be happy at the one they have. Been there. People fiddle with the numbers on their tax forms to see how much they can get back, even if it's to see what they could do next year to improve the amount they receive. Or joining the YMCA in another area because it's less expensive, and then going to a YMCA in Clifton Park because it's closer. We're still trying to make the most out of what we have. We look for loopholes in every transaction. Have you heard anyone ask, do you give discounts to senior citizens? Is there a sale going on today? It's human nature to want to get the best for your buck. I know it's a simplistic example, but Jesus knows that the people of this age will be faced with worldly decisions. Jesus knows that while on earth, we must use the currency of our temporal future to store up the riches for eternal wealth. Temporal is temporary, worldly treasures, stuff. Eternal is godly, forever, heavenly treasures. Investments, income strategies, retirement planning. There are many ways in which we increase our abilities to store up worldly wealth. You can store up your treasures until the cows come home, or at least until you die. You know the expression, you can't take it with you? Well, you can't. No matter how many houses you own, how many cars you drive, how much money you have in the bank, it will all fail. Even if they buried it in the ground with you, it would not help you in heaven. Jesus said in verse 8, when it fails, not if. What is God calling us to do? Act. Do something. He has given us so many opportunities to help others. We have talents, gifts, money to invest in godly ventures, godly programs, godly purposes. We can use our money to honor God. What good is all the money in the world if you're not using it to further God's work, to help the poor, to feed the hungry? Matthew 6, verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. We are investing in this, not the building, but this community of Christians. We are proclaiming the gospel. We are supporting missionaries like Karen Anderson, ministries like the nursery school and the ELCA Lutheran Disaster Relief, outreach, and fellowship all proclaim the gospel, all of them. All are God's work. What an incredible gift God has given us, the ability to do what we can collectively for the good of many. We could never accomplish alone what we can do together. It's not about what you have, it's about who you are. It's our love for heaven and our commitment to God that points our heart toward heaven. Where is your heart pointing you? In the end, the wealth we have, including money, talents, abilities, knowledge, possessions, all belong to God. It's not ours to begin with. None of it truly belongs to us at all, does it? Only through God do we obtain these treasures. Through his gifts are we able to earn a living, to have money to buy our treasures. Through God's grace are we healthy enough to be able to work daily. Everything belongs to God, even money. How are we treating this gift from God? Do we squander it like the prodigal son or the manager in this story? Or do we use it as a blessing to help others in need? In any duel where God is one opponent, my money's on God. Pun intended. God will always win. Money is not our master, God is. Do we concern ourselves with possessions here in this life for the short amount of time we have on earth? Or do we make eternal plans to enjoy the bountiful treasures for eternity in heaven? Let's remember the words in the last two verses of Be Thou My Vision.